Welcome, everybody, to the NAM launch of Randa Abdel-Fattah's important new novel, Discipline, with a beautiful cover by Randa's friend, Amani Haider. Yeah? My name's Micaela Sahhar. I'm a writer and educator and a member of the Palestinian Australian diaspora community, and I've admired Randa for longer than I've known her. And so it's my great honour to be here in conversation with Randa tonight. I want to start with an acknowledgement to say that we gather today on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respect to elders past and present, and to extend that respect to all First Nations people who are joining us tonight. And for me, particularly importantly, to say that sovereignty was never ceded here on Wurundjeri country or anywhere else across this continent. And as a member of the Palestinian diaspora, I want to note the large number of First Nations friends and colleagues and allies who have shown the Palestinian community unstinting support during the current genocide and across many more decades than that in our shared struggle against settler colonialism. Always was, always will be. Randa has written Discipline in a time when, as she says in her acknowledgement, art couldn't catch up with my life. It is because of this rapidly shifting topography, both witnessing a live-streamed genocide and the growing movement for Palestinian liberation, that I think it is even more vital that we have books like Randa's and conversations like this one. Randa has a very impressive resume and simultaneously, judging by the applause as she walked out, hardly needs any introduction. And she's prevailed on me to shorten and then shorten again her bio. So the long one is available on the Wheeler Centre website. And the very short one is to say that Randa is an ARC Future Fellow at Macquarie University, researching Arab and Muslim activism and social movements in Australia from the early 1970s. She's the author of many books, she's the recipient of many awards, and most importantly, she is joining us and speaking with us tonight in her personal capacity, as she has been requested to emphasise. So I am emphasising it. We are lucky to have Randa here for the next hour, but she is also unfortunately going to have to dash off very quickly at the end of our session to make a plane, because among the many things that Randa is, she's also a super mum, and she has to be at her son's graduation tomorrow morning, where she will be giving a speech as well as seeing her son graduate. For that reason, Randa won't be able to sign books at the end of the session. However, she has pre-signed books. And the wonderful Amplify bookstore, which is a terrific ethical business that is invested in promoting the work of diverse writers, is selling her book up the back. So big thank you to Amplify. Please purchase her book at the end. Down the back also, I believe, is the Readers and Writers Against Genocide merch. No one's asked me to say that. I am wearing a prototype. You can't get one of these, it's in green only, but you can get a more modern version of that T-shirt down the back as well if you're so inclined. Due to the rush, we will also not take audience questions tonight. Randa and I don't get enough time to talk to one another, and so selfishly we've decided to take all of this time for ourselves. So let's dive in, Randa. I'm going to begin by asking you about some key themes of the book and how they're intertwined both as a plot and also how they engage with our world that we're living in. So for those who haven't yet read Discipline, there are two key institutional sites in the book, the media and academia, represented in the form of a newspaper, The Chronicle, where one of the key characters is employed, and the other key character is employed at the comically named Joseph Banks University with all its settler colonial connotations. And these institutions are connected in the world of the book to two other key institutions One of them is a catalyst in the plot, which is an Islamic school and events that take place at the Islamic school and the characters around that, where a student very early in the text, it's not a plot spoiler, is arrested on terrorism charges, and then a contact at the government who's supervising research on Spare Us, yet another de-radicalisation project. The novel centres on a journalist, Hannah, who is a young diaspora Palestinian, and an academic, Ashraf, and as the two key protagonists, they illustrate two different responses, I think, to the ethical struggles and the institutional pressure that Palestinian and people and Muslim people have been subjected to in Australia, particularly in the last 2 years. And I'm wondering, Randa, if you can start us off this evening by telling us a little bit about developing their narratives and the forces that are operating on each of these characters in the book.
So the idea for the book actually came to me in 2021. That's when I first started writing it. And it came from my own research and fieldwork in schools in Sydney, looking at the post-9/11 generation, interviewing young people who were born after 9/11. Did they feel school was a safe space to express their political identities, to explore what was happening in the world? And pretty quickly, I realised that most of the students of colour, and in particular the Muslim students, and in particular the Muslim male students, were often facing the interpretation of their political expression through the lens of radicalisation. So they were subject to this suspicion, this culture of surveillance, this culture of mistrusting their political expression, for example, around what was happening in the Middle East, as something that might lend itself to them being on a path to radicalisation. I wrote an academic kind of book out of that work, but I've always felt very strongly that academia speaks to a certain, class of people, and I believe very much, and it's probably the reason I've been in trouble as an academic, that we need to democratise academic work and knowledge production and translate, for the general community. And so I started to think about how to translate these sort of research findings into a creative work. And at that time in 2021, I wanted to explore the question of a young Muslim Arab guy growing up in Western Sydney who protests Elbit systems at a university and is arrested, and also explore the role of the media and policing and surveillance culture. I put it aside at the end of 2023. In September, I emailed a publisher to say, do you think there's an appetite for a book like this? It seems that a lot of people aren't really paying attention to the at least in terms of the Muslim community, they kind of have become a bit complacent about the securitization of our communities, about the way that CVE is weaponized against young people. It's out of the media, but, our rights to protest are slowly being eroded, our rights to speak up, and, this is slowly happening. Is there an appetite for the book? And I put it aside. I wasn't sure if there would be. And then, of course, October 2023 happened. I became sort of creatively paralysed at that point, and then I returned to the book. I decided that I was struck with, do I write this and set it now? Because what is happening now, young students protesting what is happening, the weapons manufacture ties to universities, the media censorship, all of this is happening in real time. It felt too raw and close for me to be writing it now. And I was also so many Palestinians were, writing in a time where the green screen of our lives is a live stream genocide. So everything we were doing was taking place against that backdrop of a green screen of scholasticide, domicide, genocide. So I thought it's too raw. What I want to do is explore accountability. The fact that we are here now is because people didn't speak up when they had the chance. And I thought I need to narrow this down to two sites that are heavily contested and that are actually probably the most violent, which is the media and academia. And in doing that, I kind of recrafted the book. I narrowed down the scope. It was a much larger ensemble cast in the beginning, but I narrowed it down to two characters, and I really wanted to explore this question of accountability and foreshadow if people had made courageous decisions, if people had not questioned the use of terminology like apartheid and settler colonialism, and had actually allowed us to speak truth without censorship and without gaslighting us, would we now be here witnessing a genocide in real time? So it was kind of my way to use the past as a foreshadowing of why we are here now.
I want to push you a little bit on some of these sites, Randa. And actually just to say, I think there's a lot of people working against settler colonialism who take your position, actually, that we must democratise academia by using poetry, by using fiction, by using creative text to write. But I'd like you to say a little bit more about how you locate these key characters in their workplaces, and I guess the way that their experiences in those workplaces inform through the different decisions they make, inform them. So we have Hannah, the young journalist, when we meet her early in the book, she has this experience where she's been sent into community. I mean, she's sent to the school, but she's also recently been sent into community. She's done a story. She has a relationship with the contacts. And then the story is published and it's been completely Badlerised. Like it's not what she wrote. The terminology's been changed. And there's no support and no assurance from her managers at the Chronicle for her contacts, for the integrity of her story, for the sorts of things that she wants to write about and highlight. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Hannah's struggle in her job. So thinking about accountability and how she kind of is, there at the Chronicle, but also maybe the struggle for journalists who you both reference in your acknowledgements. I must say, I love the beginning and ending of books, and then anyone who has a copy and has had a flip through. Randa also redacts the names of the journalists that she was in contact with in thinking about various aspects and authenticities of the book, because of course there's a censorship and an anxiety and a fear that people have in their jobs. So, some reflections on the media.
So I'll take Hannah, the character of Hannah first. So Hannah is a young Arab Muslim journalist, a new mum, married to a PhD student from Gaza, and is back to work with a very young baby and navigating sort of the microaggressions of her workplace, the intersection between racism and sexism. And also the muting and pressure on her to be used as a tool to tap into her community. So exploiting her positionality as somebody from within this diverse community when it suits the newsroom to exploit that, to get intel. But in terms of her expertise, in terms of her analysis, in terms of how she wants to craft a story and the angle she wants to take, that's never respected. And there's a lot of internal monologues. So you hear a lot about how Hannah feels in a moment when she's speaking to the editor or to a colleague. And there's just this constraint on her voice, on being able to articulate and verbalise how she's feeling, because it's a minefield. Everything that she says, she is analysing the potential impact. If she pushes back, she'll be taken off the story because she'll be considered as the angry Arab Muslim woman, or she'll be considered as not objective. If she leans into her diversity, she's going to be seen as tokenistic, and she also doesn't want that. She wants to be respected for her credentials, not because of her hyphenated identity. So it's always this pressure for her to navigate this world and give up who she is when she steps into that newsroom, and the compromises that she's being asked to make. And also a recognition of how hard it is, and she's a junior journalist, for a lot of journalists, and I know, I spoke to so many who, and I've felt this as well, who are so often used by the media, who will spend, an hour with you, interviewing you, and then it will be one line taken out of context that ends up being published. The thing is that story is finished for the newsroom, but Hannah has a community that she has to go back to, that she's held accountable to. There was somebody else on the other end of that interview who gave something of themselves, showed vulnerability, took the time to speak about their pain. And another aspect to it is this book is set in 2021 during Israel's last assault on Gaza, during the Sheikh Jarrah protests. And, she has the anxiety of being asked to mute her political identity at a time when her husband's family are in Gaza. So it's all of this burdened on her shoulders as she's trying to navigate this world. And so for me, I say that this book was written first and foremost for my community, to validate their experiences and to tell them, I see the gaslighting, and it's about time we acknowledged the intense emotional labor that it takes just to exist as a Palestinian, as a Muslim, as an Arab, as a person of color in these white supremacist media institutions.
And of course, in contrast, we have Ashraf.
Oh, yes.
And he's quite as a Palestinian reader, I mean, he's a big disappointment.
He's a coconut. So many Ashrafs in my life.
But you give him, you do give him a bit of a story that at first you think, my gosh, this guy's had quite a traumatic personal experience, right? His wife's left in very particular circumstances. It's very hard on him. He's kind of a secular Muslim guy. You don't necessarily have a sense that his work has sort of been compromised earlier in the plot. But I wonder if you could, in thinking about these sort of poles of accountability, you've got Hannah who comes out in a particular way in the plot and becomes perhaps more resolved in her work. But what of Ashraf? Why did you put him there?
Well, there's also a generational aspect to Ashraf, and Ashraf is a character I don't write with contempt. When I say I know many Ashrafs, a lot of them are in my family. So it's a generational thing where people who have been seduced by the so-called liberal multicultural state, who believe that they will belong, they will succeed, they will climb that hierarchical ladder if they just play by the rules, that they can cultivate a little safe space for themselves within these institutions and bring people up with them in the ladder if they just make it to the top. And, Ashraf, I want to give space to this kind of mentality because it is quite shattering for many people to actually confront the fact that these institutions are never going to accept your reforms, that they are inherently violent. And for him to confront that no matter what he does to fit in, no matter how much proximity to whiteness he has, no matter how secular Muslim he is and how much he disavows that identity, he's never going to be able to fit into an institution that is fundamentally white supremacist institution. And so it's about, realizing that a lot of people will resist that existential crisis. And I think what is happening in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, has confronted so many people with an existential crisis. What does democracy mean? What does international law mean? What does academia mean? What does an acknowledgement of country in your emails from your managers at university mean when you can't talk about Israel as a settler colony, when you're not allowed to talk about genocide? So it's to actually realize that the veneer of all these liberal mythologies have been destroyed. It's easier for some people to live in that state of denial and think, like Ashraf does, that if he just quietly works at small reform and cultivates a little bit of power for himself, then he'll be able to survive and somehow change the system. But so often, and I think we have been taught this throughout the last 2 years, the system demands that you change in order to exist and thrive in it. And that's what I was trying to tease out with the character of Ashraf. And he's the supervisor to Hannah's husband, and he's confronted a lot by Jamal's absolute insistence on trying to push back, because the reality is his family is in Gaza as the bombs are dropping. And so this idea that you need to take it slow, you need to let people, come, you need to be patient with their journey. You need to use language that appeases and brings people to your cause. We've all heard this around dinner table conversations. Oh, you're too radical. Just tone it down. You have to meet people where they are to a certain extent. But I think all of that falls apart when we are witnessing a genocide. And in May 2021, they were the precursors to that. And so Jamal is that person in the room in the university who is saying, none of this makes sense to me when my family, I don't know if they're alive. I'm waiting for proof of life on a WhatsApp message as Israel's bombs fall. So all of these demands that you are making of me to take things slowly, to tone it down, do not work in my world. How do you expect me to be patient with the system? And again, it was about foreshadowing that if people who have the privilege to speak up and have the least to lose don't stand up when they have the opportunity, well, we can see now the results of that. We can see now that that courage wasn't just a personal moral failing, it was a failure on humanity, because it's a genocide is a crime against humanity because it's a crime against everybody and everyone. If Palestinians don't get international law, nobody does. If Palestinian academics don't get academic freedom, nobody does. And we can see that now. It's not just Palestinians and their allies who are suffering. Every liberal promise has been broken in order to shield Israel. And so everyone is going to suffer if we don't all pitch in and do the work.
And we see such a transformation as well in Ashraf, going from thinking about his student as being sort of a feather in his cap to being a liability. And there's this sort of, and that seems to be his journey in the book as well, as sort of this downward trajectory in terms of ethics versus career-based decisions that he's making. Randa, I know you've already touched on it a little bit, but because I want to dig in a little more to thinking about both the point in time you take in the book, but I guess understanding as a few of us have been doing, that you had this manuscript that you'd worked on earlier, but then you found yourself editing it in a different world, maybe not so different if you're already a Palestinian person, but there's you were editing and completing this book under a genocide. Exactly right. And so I think discipline grounds us in the world as it's experienced by Palestinian people, which is really refreshing in Australian literature and a wonderful contribution to it. And so we start with Unity Intifada. We're thinking about Sheikh Jarrah, and you mentioned various, verifiable things, that are happening there at the time. But it also seems like the plot then joins a horizon a little bit with the current genocide, that the edges of 2021 blur a bit into the present moment. And one of the important developments of the Unity Intifada, and I think it's quite an important sort of grounding point in this book as well, was that it really reinforced the relationships between the Palestinian diaspora and Palestinian people who have remained in Palestine. And these connections are rejecting, it seems to me, the idea that is being popularised, especially now during the genocide by state and federal politics, that Australians should not import the political tensions of foreign conflicts. We saw that also in the Special Envoy's preamble, for example, while at the same time trying to silence us with seemingly anodyne initiatives like social cohesion, which various knowledgeable commentators have said, when you hear the word social cohesion, run in the other direction. Yeah. I wonder if you could say a bit about those relationships in the book, and I'm thinking a bit about Hannah and Jamal and their relationship and their very immediate connection to Gaza, but also to our student that we start, that sort of starts is a catalyst to the plot, although we don't really see so much of him, Nabil, and the journey that is intimated, I suppose, his connection to Ein Hilwe and
I'm glad that you picked up that we don't hear a lot about Nabil before I answer your question, because he's the young student. He's 18, hence his name is exposed in the media, but he's the student, Palestinian student, who's arrested at the university protest. And we actually never hear from him directly. He's just a newspaper article and the catalyst for the book's events. And that was very deliberate. Even though I played around with the plot a little and I actually the opening scene was different. It was the actual protest and arrest. But then I realised, actually, no, Muslim Arab males don't often get space to speak on their own terms. We don't often hear from them, we hear about them. And so I thought it would be more powerful for his voice and agency to be silenced and for us to only see him in terms of the third-hand information that we get through the media. So, so it is a book that explores, what Nadine Neighbour calls the diaspora of empire, and it's very rich for, Anglo-Australia to tell us not to import political conflicts when we are on stolen land as a settler colony, that was created by the British Empire, the same empire that lent the conditions and sponsored the State of Israel to dispossess us from our land and to take away our land. So we are intimately connected with empire. So it's very convenient for them to think that we would leave that behind us. Being here, and it also conveniently serves the project of us disavowing the fact that we are on stolen land and in a settler colony. And also, it ignores the history of Australia's relationship with Israel and Palestine. The Anzac troops were stationed in Palestine during the First World War. There is a war memorial, I don't even know what happened to it now, in Gaza that was tended to by Palestinians, an Australian war memorial cemetery, a cemetery. Australia was the first country to recognise the 1947 partition plan and the first Prime Minister Chifley to recognise the State of Israel. So, of course, this settler colony, which is drenched in Indigenous blood, is also drenched in our blood. And so it is unacceptable for us to accept that we will forget all that and we will not agitate, let alone our complicity and participation, I will say, in the genocide through weapons exports. So this is all just language that is weaponised against us to silence our protest and to stop us from protesting and to stop us from asserting our right to question what is happening and to demand accountability. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe... you're speaking there really to an intellectual dishonesty on the part of, state and federal government around sort of protest laws. And, and it brings me actually to the next question I wanted to invite you to think about, which is the way that language is being used. We might call it weasel language that's just deployed especially against Palestinian people and their allies in all sorts of contexts, and we've seen so much of it in the last 2 years. And Discipline offers us a glimpse of this. For instance, when Jamal and other students organised the open letter at the university, which they send around, and Jamal's treated to an email from a head of school who offers him stress management and wellbeing services. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what you wanted to highlight for the reader in these sorts of exchanges. What makes this sort of language of risk management so insidious?
I find it so appallingly violent, this language of civility and fake care. You receive emails at university, for example, on a Friday afternoon from a head of department. I hope you enjoy the sunshine over the weekend and, have a lovely few days off work. Or, these kinds of empty words. And you just think how violent they are to have that land in your inbox as you are seeing the headless bodies of babies in your phone. And you wonder, do these people see the same images as us? It's a deliberate choice to posture as this breezy, airy-fairy, life is good kind of manager, while you know that we are all witnessing a genocide. I think there's something very sinister about that. In terms of these kind of gestures to us to seek support from the university, it has the employee assistance program or, wellbeing services after the end of every email. What is so dangerous about this is it's pathologizing what we are feeling and going through. It's making our traumatized, angry states an individual problem, when the onus is not, the blame for this is not on me and my mental health. The blame on this is not coming from within. This is something that is happening to us, not something that we are doing to ourselves. There is no pill that I can take to fix this. There is no counselling session that I can take that is going to stop that genocide. This is a structural issue. This is systems. And everyone who is telling us that you just need to go and see a counsellor or seek wellbeing support is denying how implicated they are in these systems and the status quo that allows this genocide to continue. And so we need to keep pushing back against that, because these institutions are weaponising not only this idea that if we just took our mental well-being as an individual problem, everything would be okay. It's also trying to cultivate an idea of the university and media as a space. At the same time, what they want to do is exploit diversity, equity, and inclusion against us. So I know of cases where people who have spoken up against Zionism, against Israel as a settler colonial project, it's diversity, equity, inclusion policies that are used against them to say you are being racist, you are perpetuating an environment that is not inclusive. And so we see again how this language is used, the language that was never intended to be used by colonizers is being used against people of colour to shut them up. And again, it's like Omar Barghouti said, this genocide has exposed the fault lines of liberal democracies, and all of these weasel words and language are now being exposed as weapons that are being used against us.
You're making me think of Aimé Césaire's work on, or discourse on colonialism, where he talks about the fact that Western civilization is built really on fascism. This is not an unfortunate byproduct.
Yes.
It is the intention, and it's only when it comes for you that you become concerned about the complexion of that. It's fine when it happens to racialise people elsewhere in colonial contexts. Of course, he's not talking about settler colonialism per se, but I think there's perhaps some parallels there. And so then, Randa, maybe to think, I want to take a quote from the book actually, but to think about the tension in the book and the question of allies, and we've been talking already a bit about the failure of the project of liberalism, the way that some people are sort of hoping for perhaps slow change because they don't want conflict. And so you have a character in the book, Ashraf's departmental head, and you go to some lengths to draw her as a person who has had a career in radical causes, certainly an academic career built on working on these things. She's got posters of Che Guevara, she's got Martin Luther King memorabilia, she's interested in Black history. And like Ashraf, she ultimately is working to suppress student expression. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about, I guess, institutional relationships, not necessarily just academic relationships, to the current genocide in Gaza, but thinking about one of Hannah's reflections when she goes to her book launch. And she thinks to herself, what she has no patience for is people who build their careers on interpreting the world, but who have no desire to change it. What did you want us to reflect on or think about?
When you're in these institutions where you face censorship and silencing and discipline, honestly, the the last and best resort that you have is ridicule, because they are the most ridiculous people. They really, like, I know this is a serious conversation, but I had so much fun writing this book. And the best part is that people who have read it come to me and say, oh, I used to work with so-and-so. Was that who it was about? I'm like, no, there's just so many assholes
is this
in
a
there.
moment to invite
everyone
you to read?
can see themselves. It's a different scene, but yeah, I'll read it shortly. Yeah, so they are ridiculous. They have these impressive CVs on settler colonialism and decolonial theory, and they always give these really passionate, sincere, genuine acknowledgements of country, and they won't sign a statement of solidarity. You know, or like the ones who are in management will actually be working against you, to silence you, to discipline you, to gaslight you, to manage your voice. Some of them do it in a way where they try to pretend that they're your ally. And this character here, you know, it wasn't about creating the caricature, evil kind of figure of the manager, and they certainly exist. But this one, I have a lot more contempt for. I mean, we used to talk about them as the progressive except Palestinians, the PEPs, and I hate them more than anyone because they are so disingenuous, and they lend themselves to ridicule, and I think that's our last weapon against them, to really show them up for the hypocrites that they are and the phonies that they are. And so this is what Jamal confronts, that the person who is trying to manage his voice in very polite, civil ways, the one who pretends to be on his side, who offers empty words of sympathy, but has no interest in actually understanding what he's going through. And I'm sure anybody here who's worked in any kind of workplace will understand and appreciate those colleagues who never take the time to ask, really, how are you coping? You know, who want to just continue as if this genocide isn't going on, as if they have nothing to do with it. And I find that this is the most insidious part of a lot of these kinds of managers who are happy to exploit decolonisation and happy to exploit, you know, reading and writing about, you know, literature on people of colour, who can quote Malcolm X, who can quote, you know, bell hooks, Angela Davis. They always have an Angela Davis quote. But they are basically there to ensure that the status quo remains protected, and are careerists ultimately. And I don't envy them at all. I don't envy them at all. And in fact, Ashraf, the character of Ashraf and Jamal, I am questioning and interrogating as well, what does it mean to have ambition in these kinds of institutions? If it means to get to the top that you have to sacrifice your moral conscience and integrity, if it means that you can be the best scholar on decolonisation and yet not be able to sign a statement on decolonisation as it's happening in real time, then really what is your career worth?
I mean, there's no intellectual study of post-colonialism without the Palestinian scholar Edward Said and Frantz Fanon. And if you have built your career on that and you can't sign a statement, what are you doing there?
Yeah.
You know.
Complete phonies.
Yeah. Randa, I want to maybe move away a little bit from the book and think about the context in which this book has been brought into the world. And some of the obstacles that you've encountered in...
The disciplinary obstacles.
That's right, the disciplinary obstacles that you've encountered. And I was tipped off happily by a small review in The Age, which noted that some pressure had been directed to you and to your publisher, UQP. The pressure, as far as the article recalls, was Jewish leaders in Queensland who interfered or attempted to interfere in Discipline's publication in its writing. What has the pressure been like on you bringing out this book in this time?
Yeah, so there were attempts to have the book cancelled, so pressure brought to bear on UQP to have it cancelled. and the usual smear campaigns of being, how can you publish an anti-Semite, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, it was the solidarity of UQP authors led by First Nations and authors of colour who really stood by me and really showed what collective solidarity can do, which is something I try to do with the book as well. The one of the things I explore in the book is the temptation for people to think that they don't have power because we are living in a world and in these institutions where we are made to feel so atomised and individualised and to be afraid of collective solidarity. And this was a perfect example of how collective solidarity is impactful and can actually change the course, of certain pressures brought to bear on. And that's the reason, ultimately, that the book was able to come in the world with the support of my incredible publisher, Aviva.
Maybe relatedly, Randa, thinking about the power of collective action, but also the insidious pressure that's been brought to bear on you, especially on this book, but you, I think, more broadly. I think there'll be many in the audience who are aware of what I now refer to as the Bendigo Writers' Festival debacle that was single-handedly brought down by one Palestinian woman sitting next to me. And for those who don't know, but I'll let you sort of talk a bit more about it, Randa was approached 2 days before the opening of the festival to sign a code of conduct, which would have required that she agree or acquiesce to the University Australia definition of anti-Semitism, which is, as a Palestinian person, an impossible thing to labour under or to talk about a book like Randa's book under. I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about the problem of what happened here. A few days later we learnt what had happened, but this wasn't known at the time. So the problem of what happened here, which was, has ironic but really quite devastating parallels to the narrative in your book as well.
Yeah, so it was 2 days before that I received this email. We I think it was the La Trobe uni panels that received it first, and it required not me to sign, but to commit to the code of conduct. So the code of conduct itself was already, the red flags were there, like to avoid divisive, inflammatory language. The kind of the red flags where that kind of what you want to say on the stage is going to be managed and toned policed. But then I saw a reference to La Trobe University's anti-racism policy, and even before I opened it, I thought, I know what's happening here. And sure enough, it was the policy that refers to the Universities Australia definition, which actually is worse than the IHRA, if that's possible, in that it explicitly equates and conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So, I laboured for about 5 minutes as to whether or not I should just should attend. And I thought, a lot of these institutions sometimes, the problem that we have with a lot of these sort of feckless managerial classes is that they don't have the spine to actually not indulge these sort of vexatious attempts to silence us. So they think that if they just send out the code of conduct, it's all just going to go away and people will just show up and there's probably not going to be much fuss and they've done their job. But as a matter of principle, I couldn't go because it required implicitly that I would commit to that. And there's no way as a Palestinian that I can commit to that definition. And also, again, in the realm of the satirical and the ridiculous, I was on a panel called On Reckonings about a book called about silencing and discipline. And so it just felt that this was an insane ask of me. And so I quietly withdrew. What I love about this is that I didn't ask anybody to withdraw. And it just shows, because we were around at the time of the 2022 Sydney Festival boycott, and some people, many people, had to have their hand held through that. But now the things have changed. The tide has shifted, at least in the literary world. And there was, a momentum of authors who I don't know, who withdrew. And I'm not going to take the credit that they withdrew in solidarity with me as a Palestinian. I actually think something even better happened, is that they realised that this attempt to silence Palestine, to shield the state of Israel from criticism, meant that that these institutions would throw everything under the bus in order to do that. And so, like I said before, people are realising, if I'm not going to get, as a Palestinian, freedom of speech, nobody is. Because the masks have been lifted now, and you have to undo the entire infrastructure of your liberal democracy and your empty mythologies around free speech and academic freedom and intellectual exchange of ideas in order to shield a state and a political ideology from criticism. And so I think so many people realise, actually, this project to protect this settler colony is a project that's going to come after all of us. And I think that was what was so incredible about what happened. Obviously, there are a lot of people who were materially impacted by that. The Bendigo community, the bookstore withdrew in solidarity, the local economy would have been impacted, the writers themselves. And I think that this is something that sits squarely in, it needs to be held accountable by La Trobe University and Bendigo Council. They should be held accountable for this, because it wasn't us that destroyed that festival, it was their actions that did.
The bookseller for the festival is actually my dad's local bookstore. And he popped down with a particular Palestinian cake after I alerted him to the fact that they had withdrawn in solidarity. And I called the next day to arrange a book voucher for my parents and told them why. I said, we're Palestinian and I want to thank you. But the woman on the phone was really emotional and said that they'd had an enormous upswell of community support. And it seemed to me that one of the really important things that happened for the bookshop, and I hope for the authors, but this is harder to track, is that people realise that being on the side of Palestinian people is not the liability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, and we're seeing that now. We're seeing that what you have to destroy in order to prop up that Zionist state is tearing down so much. And our response to that is to show an alternative way of living. We are actively using our imagination to think about a broader and more inclusive horizon of freedom and a different way of living together. And the opportunities for collective solidarity and care that have come out of this have been incredible. Like, for example, yesterday I was at Aldi going to get a trolley. I had my daughter with me. She faked being sick from school and was with me and was skipping around. And I was wearing my keffiyeh, and an elderly man came up to me and he just lifted up his hand and he showed me that he had this little band with a Palestinian flag. And then he got very teary and he said, I didn't know anything about what was happening before October 7. And since then, my eyes have been opened and I've educated myself. I've attended every rally. I've lost all my friends. He was 80 years old. I am so lonely. I can't, I'm so happy to see you here. He spent 45 minutes talking to me. And then he left, and I thought, my daughter said, "Why didn't you get his number?" And I thought, I really regretted it. And then I was still in the shopping. Started shopping in the Aldi aisle, and he came up to me after it. He said, "I just wanted to show you something on Instagram." And then he showed me he had been at the Bondi protests. And he said, I went and I stood, and I tried to keep myself in between the Zionist, protesters and the lovely Muslim Palestinian families. And then he showed me an Instagram reel. I said, oh my God, I shared that yesterday. Look at this coincidence. And then I said, please give me your number and I'll have you over for a barbecue with my dad. You're the same age. And it was like, and then he messaged me later that evening and I realized they've lost. What we are creating here is something magical. It is community, it is care, it is really bringing out the best in what it means to be human, to actually see each other and reach across all these divisions. And there is nothing that I have gained more than moral clarity, all of us in this moment. And I think that's something that despite the absolute horrors that we continue to witness, is something that we should treasure. Like you said, we know right and wrong without any equivocation or debate now, and there is something so strong in that and powerful.
I mean, one of the good news stories that came also out of the Bendigo Writers Festival is that ABC Regional Radio lifted its long-standing ban, I heard, against you appearing on the air.
Yeah, I hadn't been asked back since, I think, November 2023, but suddenly notoriety can get you an interview.
Yeah, hot property. Randa, we're sort of drawing to the end of our time and drawing to the end of what's possible to cover. I wanted to ask you, I suppose, a concluding question. I don't know if you want to tether it with the reading for us or not. It's entirely up to you. So we've seen in the last week, actually, the shock announcement of the closure of Meanjin Literary Journal. And Meanjin has been one of the supportive outlets, I would say, to Palestinian people, not just recently, but over some years. And I'm reminded in particular, Randa wrote a great piece that I refer to often, and everyone who hasn't read it should go and read it after this, called The Great Palestinian Silence. And you published that in 2020 in response to an open letter that you and I and Sarah Saleh had arranged around the annexation of the West Bank, which of course is back in the news. And very quickly we had 700 signatures, and we were told that this was not in the public interest by any mainstream outlet, even though we counted it ourselves and discovered that 29 signatures for other things is in the public interest. And in response to this, Randa kind of wrote about that story and about that experience for Meanjin. I think it's true to say that literary spaces have been quite radical ones during the current genocide, and I'm thinking also of places like Overland when I say this. And while claims have been made that the closure is purely a cost analysis, there are certainly intimations, although I do not have it on any authority, that the closure is to the contrary a punishment for its content. Discipline is obviously thinking about censorship, about career advancement, and also the punishment that people suffer in their careers when they don't fall in line. I wonder what lessons you intended for readers to take from the book, Randa, and maybe more importantly, what can we all do to cultivate and retain our undiscipline?
Yeah. I think one of the main, well, there are a few lessons. The first, I would say, is to resist the temptation to not believe in the power of the collective, to think that you can solve this on your own as an individual, or to think of this as an individual problem. Our power truly lies in mobilising and organising. And there are characters in the book who really I try to interrogate this idea that you cannot fight these systems if you believe in the project of reform. These systems are ultimately violent and designed to shatter you and your confidence and your ability to believe in yourselves. And so it's really about trying to get my characters to rally around the idea of humanity and the collective versus the individual. And that applies not just to, although genocide is a metaphor for everything that we are fighting against, but it also applies to our resistance against neoliberalism and capitalism and all these violent systems that tell you that you're sick or that you don't have a job or that you can't afford a home because it's you. It's a you problem, and it's not a problem of these systems that are designed to make you think that you are an individual failure rather than in a system that is designed to make you fail. Another lesson I wanted with this book, particularly in the micro world of the Islamic school, was to interrogate a very big generational shift in what it means to be a person of colour, in this particular case, a Muslim and an Arab, as a settler of colour on stolen land. And as somebody who's come from the world of Islamic schools and my children attend them, there is a huge tension there between attending a school where you're learning about your faith and your identity and you're singing the national anthem, Or, I'll never forget walking into my daughter's assembly and all these little girls in hijabs singing "Give Me a Home Among the Gum Trees." So, the aesthetic of what it means to be this Australian, which is completely disconnected from the reality of the diaspora of empire, literally being the student and teacher population. So again, Hannah is a younger sort of character who isn't seduced by the liberal multicultural project and actually feels very strongly that she is a settler on stolen land, and that does animate the way she responds to what's happening in Gaza and her response also to the people in her life who just want her to forget and be more apolitical.
Thank you, Randa. I think...
Should I do the reading?
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as you give me 2 minutes to wrap up.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Perfect.
So Hannah's just boarded the bus. It's Ramadan, and she's late for work. She made it just as the last of the waiting passengers were getting on the bus. The driver looked at her without expression as she scanned her Opal card. She found a spot towards the back and, breathless, sat down. During the bus ride, Hannah listened to the latest updates on the lynching of a Palestinian man in a Tel Aviv suburb by a mob of Israelis, wrestled with forms on MyGov, advised a Palestinian Iraqi lawyer in one of her advocacy WhatsApp groups on whether to push back against 4 rejections of his op-ed, suggested some edits on a Black Palestinian solidarity statement, and placed a Coles home delivery order for later that evening, as she'd forgotten to buy nappies last night when she'd gone to Coles solely for the purpose of buying nappies and returned with a trolley full of everything but nappies. She was a shriveled, dehydrated prune today, multitasking trauma and banality in a state of disassociation. And thank God for it. Every last tear had poured out of her and onto her prayer mat the night before. She'd begged God to protect Jamal's family. Hannah sent a message to Jamal's sister, checking in, then switched back to updating her income details and silently cursing the MyGov interface. As the app buffered, she looked out the window and remembered last night at the shops, when she clearly wasn't buying nappies. She'd bumped into Tanya from the gym. She was a regular boxing partner in their combo fit class. "Hannah," she'd cried, giving her a wide, genuine smile. "You've missed 3 weeks. Where have you been?" "Gaza," was Hannah's automatic reply. She didn't have a supermarket aisle explanation for what it is that people do when their homelands are being bombed. And so, quickly, she'd backtracked. "I mean Ramadan. I paused my membership." Tanya had looked at her blankly. "But Israel is also bombing Gaza, places where my family is from, and..." Tanya had interrupted, gently touching Hannah's arm. "Oh yes, of course, it's so terrible," Tanya had said. She'd been genuine, of this Hannah had no doubt. "That's why I don't watch the news," Tanya had added. "It's too depressing." It made sense, Hannah supposed, to ignore the news when you're not the news.
Thank you, Randa. Randa has written our Palestinian Australian diasporic lives into her beautiful book, Discipline. So if you're Palestinian, you need a copy because you'll feel seen. If you're not Palestinian, you'll need a copy because you should learn. Thank you to this tremendous powerhouse, Randa Abdel-Fattah. It's been my absolute honour to speak with you. But before we clap, I want to thank the Wheeler for programming the event. Yeah. It's so important to have spaces to program Palestinian voices. I want to thank Amplify Books, who are down the back. I want to thank Readers and Writers Against Genocide, UQP, Randa's wonderful editor, who's stood with her throughout this journey. And most of all, can we all thank Randa Abdel-Fattah?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Micaela. Thank you.